And now I would like to welcome my guest speaker to this podcast. And she is Pamela Fernandes, and she is a Catholic author and podcaster. So, Pamela, you are a Catholic and you have your own podcast to share about your faith. Can you introduce yourself to the listeners of who you are, your Christian background, and tell us about why it is important for you to share about the good news?
Hi, good morning, George. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of your wonderful podcast, and thank you for being a guest on my podcast as well. So, who am I? I am an author, I am a physician, and I am a medical writer. So, I have written the 10 Reminders series for Christian people, as well as host the podcast, the Christian Circle podcast, where you were a guest last year. So, this is what I do. And you said, why share the good news? I think the Great Commission in Matthew 28, from verses 16 to 20, talk to us about being commissioned, of being sent out to go and make disciples of people, baptize them, teach them, especially go out to the lost and declare Jesus' authority over heaven and earth and his promise to be with us until the end of time. So we have been told that we should be. It's our responsibility, it's our duty to go and share the good news with other people, share Jesus' authority with other people, share the news that he has come because he has loved us and he has died for us and saved us. And so as a Christian, it is each person's responsibility to go out and tell people who have no idea and no clue about Christ, about who he is and what he has done for us.
So, Pamela, thanks a lot for what you shared, especially about why we are to share the good news, which is the responsibility of each Christian. Pamela, doing the will of God is very important for Christians. Can you walk us through if the will of God is to have a ministry, how to eventually start a ministry, and also how is one to discern about what type of ministry? In other words, how to know what God really wants from a particular ministry?
Well, of course, how do we know that God is calling us to ministry? First of all, he is calling us to do ministerial work in some way or form of the other, because how else are we going to share the good news with other people? There is a unique talent or an ability that each of us are blessed with that other people, cannot do or cannot practice. And so there is a way that I can share the gospel that other people cannot. So is God calling you to have a ministry? Yes, he's calling you to be a part of something. He's calling you to share the gospel in some way. Now, how will you know which way? I think I'll address that first. How do you discern which is that ministry that is for you? So the first thing I think is important to remember that usually a lot of times our ministry comes forth from or springs forth from our circumstances. And sometimes it'll be deep pain or deep sorrow or very difficult circumstances through which the Lord brings our ministry. I've known a lot of people who started ministries, based on their own problems in life. So they had, an issue with a particular vice, and so from there they use their experience to start a ministry. There are people who are called to doing working with pregnant women or working with the elderly, or those who wanted to go and serve in singing because they were talented at that, or they were good at leading worship, or they're good at preaching. So different people have different gifts and talents, and so look at where God has worked in your life. Look at your abilities, look at your circumstances. A lot of times the Lord will bring a ministry forth from things that you've learned, experiences that you've had, and you can share with other people. Secondly, you'll feel a deep gnawing. So for me, I started the podcast. The Lord was asking me to start it during the time where my dad had recently died. And I was thinking to myself, this is just not possible. But the Lord kept bringing it to my attention over and over and over and over again. And until I made the decision, I did not have any peace. So once I did make the decision to start the podcast, it was very, very peaceful. So you will know once you make the decision that you will have a great amount of peace. How will he qualify you? Or how will, you have the ability to do this? So I thought always it used to be just a saying, God qualifies the people he calls, but it's true. When I started the podcast, I really had no idea what I was doing. I didn't even know what a podcast was, and I had no clue about radio, broadcasting, nothing. But the Lord taught me and led me to various resources that I could learn, and it becomes so much easier when the Lord is calling you to do something. Things become easy, you have divine connections. I really had no idea how to invite people onto a podcast. I didn't know anyone, and I kept saying to the Lord, who is ever gonna come and talk to me? Like, how is this even gonna work? And I've had really, really famous authors. I've had very famous preachers and priests and wonderful people who've come on the podcast. How, even today, I have no idea. How they answered that call, I have no idea. But I know that it was the Lord's call and it was not mine. So, if you look at all of it, once you make the decision to discern, God will show you what He wants you to do. And He will remind you repeatedly until you have decided to do what He's asking you to do. And then you will have a great amount of peace. And then He will equip you in ways. If you go searching, you will find answers easily. If you decide to learn something, He will teach you very easily. He will form divine connections for you. So that's how usually it kind of plays out.
Thanks, Pamela, for sharing about how to start a ministry and especially how to discern about it and of discovering what our talents are. We are aware any Christian ministry requires a lot of preparation and resources. And also there are a lot of challenges to run the work of the ministry. Can you explain to us, especially through your experience, what kind of preparation and resources are required? Besides, what challenges one expects to face and how to overcome such challenges?
So as far as preparation and resources are concerned, once you decide to do anything, any ministerial work, or you decide to commit to something, the first thing is your time, and we're supposed to give, when we give 10% of everything, we're also supposed to give 10% of our time and of ourselves to the Lord. And so you're marking that time every single month, every single week, for years is something that you should be thinking about. You should not be thinking that this is going to be a flash in the pan, maybe one season and then you're done. So you need to think of this as a yearly, at least a year-long commitment before you can think of a decade-long commitment. So time is one of the most important resources that you will need. Secondly, if you're starting a new ministry versus joining an established ministry, money. You're going to require financial resources, and a lot of times you will say, where is this going to come from? And I have to say this, but the Lord will provide. And you don't need to even ask people, hey, I need provisions, or I need help financially. So initially I had started this thing where I would say, help me out with a coffee, or I started doing Patreon, and then the Lord convicted me that this was my ministry work. And so I didn't need to ask for provision because the Lord will provide. And of course, He is Jehovah Jireh. So He will provide for you with resources. He will bless you in some ways that you can be able to do this ministry work on your own. And if you are short or you are failing in some way, I would say just commit to the ministry. Like, put in your resources first and the Lord will bless you bountifully afterwards. So money is another thing that you will require based on equipment or based on travel time or all those things. For a podcast, I remember initially I did require a microphone. I needed software. I also had to learn recording because editing a podcast is difficult and expensive. So you will have various expenditures that are involved. Third, I think as far as resources are concerned, I think on personal level you will have to think of persistence. There will be many challenges that will come, and you will think, okay, this is it, I'm done, I'm giving up. So you need to be persistent about it, and that is part of your preparation, that you need to think of this as a long-term thing. And finally, I think when you're preparing to do any ministry work, I think the first most important thing about everything is prayer. And you cannot do any work if you're not praying. You have to, if you're a worship leader, you need to know the God that you worship. If you're a singer, then you need to know the God that you're praising. So if you're preaching, you need to know the God that you are preaching about. So a lot of this is personal time of prayer with the Lord. And, if you're full of what the Lord has, then you can give to other people. So you cannot give out of an empty cup. And that's why prayer is something that will help you. It'll help you fight your challenges, your battles, as well as stay persistent, as well as dig deep into the abundance of God's resources. So that's for preparation and resources. As far as challenges are concerned, well, there are plenty. Believe me, you will have God's favor when you're doing His work, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to have challenges. I remember when I first started the podcast, I had invited a guest, and she, I think, had to take or hire somebody to look after her children so she could record with me. And then when we were recording, at the end, I realized that the recorder had not worked. And, she refused to do the podcast again, which was sad, and I completely understood, but, things like that happen. Then, I don't know if you remember, there used to be a software called Pamela for Skype, and I was using that to record. And finally, the company went bust. So, I was stuck with this software that I now had, and I paid money for that I couldn't use. So there are various challenges. You find that there are many, many hiccups when you do the podcast or you do a ministry. There'll be many mistakes that you will make, and you take all of them into your stride. You know that the Lord is with you. Know that you can overcome. Know that you're a daughter of a king. You're a conqueror. And so you're not really going to be affected by, hiccups or challenges. In fact, when the challenges come, you say, count it all joy that, this has happened, and learn from it and move on. So that's one thing. When you have challenges, you will make mistakes. You will have errors, but you will learn from them and you will come out on top of them. Another thing is you will be humbled by a lot of these challenges. Prepare to be humbled. Prepare to, encounter issues, because this is ministerial work, and you will face principalities of darkness. You're not just fighting ordinary enemies. So prepare to have challenges, expect them, and when they happen, don't give up and don't get upset. Just pray through them and just move on from them. So those are the things that you will see more often than not, but don't be surprised by them.
Thanks a lot, Pamela, for your valuable information and knowledge you shared with us about how to start a ministry and of discovering what the Lord wants from us. So before ending this interview with you, I would like to also ask you how to preserve any ministry work, that it would function for a long time and be preserved in doing the will of God. Also, Pamela, what are your final words of encouragement for those that have a calling to start a ministry, but are afraid to do so or still deciding about it?
So for any longevity in ministerial work, like I said earlier, prayer is important. If you can partake of the sacraments, I love spending time before the Blessed Sacrament. It's just where I somehow draw a lot of strength. No matter how hard or how difficult sometimes things are, I just prefer just sitting there. Sometimes I don't even pray, I just wait, And I think that's very important. Partaking of the sacraments, spending time in the Lord's presence, that's so important to edify you, to strengthen you. Secondly, I think you should also remember that this is not about you. So at times you will feel like, oh, nobody's really paying attention to my ministry. It's not getting famous, or I wonder how many people are even listening to me. These negative thoughts will come to you, but remember, this is not about you. This is about God. And so if you remember your calling, that the reason why I am doing this is because God has called me to share the good news, then none of all these other things really matter. I am doing my job, I'm doing my duty because I love the Lord and I want to serve Him. So make that your focus. Also, don't aim for perfection. You cannot be perfect. No matter how many times you try, there will be errors. And as you learn and grow on your own, you will realize that there's no such thing as a perfect ministry. There's always going to be flaws because we're flawed human people. If anybody is thinking, or not sure about whether they should start a ministry, whether they should join a ministry or not, or they're afraid, then I would draw you to St. Catherine of Siena's words, which is, start being brave about everything. Drive out darkness and spread light. Don't look at your weaknesses. Realize instead that in Christ crucified, you can do everything. So just be brave, just be bold. And I remember she says in her other works as well, be who God meant you to be and you will set the world on fire. And that's the thing. In the end, we just do just like what Mary says, just do what He tells you. Just do what He tells you. And sometimes it's so hard to do that, even though it sounds so easy, because a lot of times when the Lord calls us to do something, it just seems or sounds so contrary to what the world is telling us to do or what our understanding of things are. But God sees so far ahead in time. So if the Lord is telling you something, just like Mary said, do what He tells you and be brave. And as soon as you decide to be the person that God has called you to be, you will do amazing things during your lifetime here. And then those things will carry on forward long after your death too. So I hope these words from the great Dominican doctor of the church will encourage you. Thank you, George, for having me on your podcast, and God bless you.
Thanks a lot, Pamela. It was a real pleasure for having you on this podcast, for encouraging us with our calling of sharing the good news. We wish you all the best on your ministry, especially with regards to your podcast, and I hope that you would be back on this podcast to discuss another topic with regards to our Christian faith.
Getting to know about Mary's silence. This online course intends to help the student deepen the relationship with Mary through her silence and to discover Mary in one's life. Through the journey of Mary's life, during this course one will discover Mary's silence. When being joyful, when being in pain, her silence in doing the will of God. On this journey, imagination will help the student to discover what Mary went through in her silence. Join this online course, Getting to Know About Mary's Silence, available at Udemy, with the Christian instructor George Calleja, who is a Christian author and podcaster. Getting to Know About Mary's Silence, available at Udemy.